country, two systems is a principle formulated by the late Chinese paramount leader Deng Xiaoping in the late 90s. Now, he suggested that there would only be one China, but distinct Chinese regions such as Hong Kong and Macau can retain their original capitalist systems, while the rest of China adopts the socialist system. Now, the principle was set to last for 50 years initially, and it has permitted Hong Kong to administer its own affairs while participating internationally as part of the People's Republic of China. 20 years later, this principle has witnessed great success, but at the same time also different interpretations and conflicts, with some people calling to discard the one country aspect altogether, in other words, calling for Hong Kong's independence. So how has the one country, two systems worked out in practice over the past 20 years, and what does the future hold? Welcome to another roundtable discussion of The Point in Hong Kong on the future of one country, two systems. I'm pleased to be joined today by Professor Richard Hu, Professor and Head of the Department of Politics and Public Administration of the University of Hong Kong, Dr. Won, Chairman Emeritus of the Y Elite Association, and last but not least by Mr. Ho King Chun, convener of One Country, Two Systems Youth Forum. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. First of all, let's try to go back 20 years, even go back to the late 1970s. Why did Deng Xiaoping come up with this concept for the future of Hong Kong and Macau?
I think in the world there was no such creative model or thinking to think about how a sovereign country can recover its part has been occupied by or ruled by another sovereign. So it's based on the Sino-British agreement, the joint declaration between the two countries. British agreed to hand over Hong Kong to China.
What was the principal ideas that led him to come up with this idea, or the principal aims for this one country, two systems?
I think mainly at that time, people of Hong Kong was afraid. They were afraid. A lot of people originally from, were originally from mainland China. They fled here because of the Cultural Revolution or a lot of political movements before that. So there was always this fear of a communist rule. Mm-hmm. So at that time, I think Deng Xiaoping introduced this so that people can feel more easy, mm-hmm. that their lifestyle won't change, they will still recognize private property, this kind of guarantee, so that because we know we have a big migration crowd during the mid-80s until late 90s, and this is one of those things to calm people down so that people can still stay here, they still do business, they still have titles to their property.
I think the Chinese government also need to give sufficient confidence to also international investors. So this one country systems actually was welcomed by Hong Kong and the international since 1980s.
Mm-hmm. Looking back 20 years later, what were some of the biggest challenges you think that this principle would be facing?
A system designed 20 years ago or 30 years ago, when the basic law was issued, there are something we could not foresee.
For instance?
For instance, the basic law in the appendix allow Hong Kong to have universal suffrage to elect chief executive 10 years after handover. And we didn't foresee there's such large political controversial around the means and design of how we should elect the chief executive. Although the basic law says there should be a selection committee or nomination committee first, and then people vote on the person nominated by the committee, mm-hmm. but there's caused a lot of controversial in the society.
Mm-hmm. Was this the flaw of the basic law, or the flaw of this principle that we are seeing this, or are there other factors leading to this kind of huge political division?
There's a lot of factors leading mm-hmm. to that political controversial. I think although we can say by and large one country, two systems was very successful, but the Hong Kong society is changing over the last 20 years.
Yes.
Economically, we're still growing, but not as fast as we expected. So a lot of young people, did not get good job opportunity. They cannot afford to purchase a house. There's a lot of social frustration in Hong Kong. So that led people call for a different system to elect a CE.
When the one country, two systems principle was designed, there was one element inbuilt, which was the separation between the systems. I recall that the former leader Jiang Zemin coined the term 井水不犯河水, meaning the well water should not overflow to the river. So I think this has also been believed by many Hong Kong people. But as we see, the economic and social integration between Hong Kong and the mainland has progressed very much, while politically we are still dividing into two systems. So this may be one of the reasons why I think on one hand we have great progress in economic and social integration, but on the other hand we are still having a political divide.
Dr. Hong, what is your experience and observation?
First of all, this one country, two system thing is unprecedented. Okay, and then we have fundamentally the common law and the continental law. There's a difference as well. And you're having the basic law as the so-called mini constitution. In design, there are certain things that principally there are different interpretations. So when it was decided, nobody can actually spell all these little things. And then when it comes to new practice, it's not just on the election systems. They are on the right of a vote. There are other things. There has been conflicts between where people who are used to common law thinking will react differently. For example, there was always been an argument where they are residual power, because the Constitution said, according to basic law, the central government gave so much power to the Hong Kong SAR government. Now, what were the rest? Some people will argue there will be power, and the rest of power should be, because it's not specified, should be given to local authorities. Whereas according to the mainland Chinese interpretation, there was no such a thing as residual power, because everything, if they didn't give, they still have it. So this kind of fundamental understanding actually creates conflicts. I think the election method is just one, but it actually led to, there's still a, I wouldn't say, mistrust is probably over a word, but you overuse of the word, but there's still a lack of total understanding and trust between the Hong Kong people and the mainland, the central government.
But often people tend to focus on the problems, and let's also look at the broad picture. Mr. Hu, Professor Hu, you have said that this one country, two systems have by and large been successful. What are your supporting arguments for that? Let's take a look at both sides of the coin.
It was successful because over the last 20 years, we have preserved the social and political systems by the design of basic law, pretty well. The rule of law still strong, and also over the last 20 years, I can say Hong Kong's economic prosperity still maintained, and the living standard maintained. But although it's not as satisfactory as to some people, and also I should say the model was kind of a role model to the rest of the world. No other parts of the world can successfully handle this kind of complicated sovereignty issues. Deng Xiaoping used this one country, two system model, creatively solved the transfer of sovereignty issues.
In the past 30 years, I think China's development is like a high-speed train with the pace of 7 to 10% GDP growth in the past 30 years. I think Hong Kong, our prosperity was not on our own. Our prosperity, even in the past 50 years, was dependent on our relationship with mainland China. So I think, although we have all sorts of problems, but many of them are global in nature, like low mobility for young people, like high property prices. But at least we have been able to ride on this high-speed train that I think that makes us still in a leading position around the world.
Is there this tendency of separating the two aspects of this principle instead of saying one country, two systems altogether because they are an integral part of this principle, but pitching the one country against the two systems? Is there such a trend?
Some people in Hong Kong trying to overemphasize the high degree of autonomy, which is the two-system part. They're trying to argue that Hong Kong actually something close to sovereignty. That's wrong. That's deadly wrong. And in some ways, they use all kind of excuse to not put Hong Kong in a subjective position to the central government. I think that's also very wrong. And then this is also caused a lot of problem among the young people. They are not identified with the nation. So national identity is a big problem here in Hong Kong.
Yeah. How come these young people who are born, some of often around the time of the return or even after the return of Hong Kong, have this nostalgic feeling towards the British rule, even if they never really lived those days? Dr. Horn?
I think one of the things is affected by media, whether purposely or there's a lot of media who have been trying to describe the British ruling time as heaven, as paradise. And for those of us, I mean, I'm relatively younger, but those of us a bit older who have lived through the actual British rule, they will definitely testify it's not that case. But for most young people who have not experienced, they kind of just fantasize basically all these good memories of the British rules, especially for the last 10 to 15 years for the British rules. So, and then they are not very satisfied with the current environment. I think Hong Kong has gone through, we have gone through the economic crisis, the Asian economic crisis, and then the 2007 economic crisis worldwide. They lack the kind of, I think, confidence or kind of how to look at the future. So they kind of go back to look at the past. And then they say, oh, good old days. So, and I think we have not been putting enough emphasis in terms of education as well. I mean, there have been a big debate about national education during 2011 and 12, and then the government at the last minute back out. So, right or wrong, I think we need to at least let our young people understand and know the factual things. For example, Hong Kong is part of China. I mean, that's undebatable. Number two, how did this British colony was formed in the first place, and how did the basic law was drafted, why was it done that way? All kind of these things, factual things, which you at least present to our people. A lot of our young people do not have the basic understanding or even knowledge of such things, and therefore can easily, affected by some very sensational media
coverage. Yeah. What would be, let's just suppose, what would be the future for Hong Kong if there is really this Hong Kong independence? What kind of consequence will it have on the people in the society?
Well, I think this so-called independence movement is one which is very immature, and also at least at this up to now is still a kind of words or lip service, if you like. I think we don't have any. I think most Hong Kong people would not support independence. Our arrangements were already been confirmed by the Basic Law, and I think no international community or no country would recognize such a country called Hong Kong, because we have been part of China throughout history, and we have just gone through the colonial period, and now we are part of China. So I think this is neither feasible nor desirable by most Hong Kong people.
The Hong Kong independence actually is a fake issue.
Yeah. Let me just say we have to take a very short break, but our discussion on the future of one country, two systems will continue right after this. Welcome back to a special roundtable discussion on Hong Kong, the future of one country, two systems. Professor Ho, you were just saying the issue of Hong Kong independence is a fake issue. What do you mean?
I think, as Henry just said, there's no way Hong Kong could be an independent country. No other country will recognize Hong Kong's independence. Now, this issue has been arise because some kind of social sentiment among the society. Some people still live in the past. They consider past was beautiful, because Hong Kong since handover, there's no decolonization process, and also our education system have some problems. The Chinese history, when I grew up, I learned the Chinese history. We have a profound understanding of our motherland, but after the education curriculum reform in Hong Kong, the Chinese history course is not compulsory. So many young kids do not have Chinese history. So this is weakened their attachment with the mainland.
The problem of making history education not compulsory as part of the curriculum. What are the reasons? I mean, I understand there were efforts to push for this kind of education. However, it was not successful. What would the fun?
Every country, young kids should grow up with some degree of patriotism. It is something you grew up in a social environment, learn from your family, from school, from government, from society, from the media. You should be loyal to your country. But Hong Kong is, especially young people, they do not have the historical knowledge about the past. So they live under one country, two systems. They consider we're not part of China. So we should not have any loyalty to the PRC. That's deadly wrong. And this is on and on. The young people have some kind of illusion. They're not Chinese. They're not belong to PRC. So this is.
I think what we're talking about is whether Chinese history should be an independent subject. I think Chinese history elements are still there in different subjects, but in a patchy manner. So I think I support Chinese history. Bear in mind we're talking about junior secondary school, right, and not senior secondary. And I'm pleased that the new Chief Executive, Carrie Lam, just committed to reintroduce Chinese history as a compulsory subject. I think that would help boost the national identity of our young people.
How successful is she going to be? Because I understand the chief executives of the special administrative government have been plagued by the kind of weak authority they have. How do you look at the future prospect of her work in this regard?
I think to a certain extent that's true, because we have a strong opposition in the Legislative Council, and the filibustering kind of become a habit now. It's become norm. So very difficult. I once had a good friend who left the Hong Kong government and went back to England. He's an Irish guy. He said the Legislative Council in Hong Kong has no power to do good things, but have every power to stop good things from being done. It's by design. It's not a person. And then right now we're really facing that, because we have a Legislative Council who will filibuster on anything, and including those things that are beneficial to the people of Hong Kong, the livelihood of Hong Kong. Having said that, I think I've known Mrs. Lam for a while. I've been witnessing her as a very strong personality, very committed to do things. So hopefully he'll get through.
Are we talking about an inherent contradiction of this principle? Is when you have these, when you try to say, well water doesn't interfere with river water, but when you are coexisting, when you are increasingly integrating with each other, you would have to communicate, and not just on doing business, but also on your mind and your heart, come closer as a people. Is it really possible to have this kind of two systems flourishing under the one country arrangement?
I think looking forward, I think the problem may be that we should walk on both legs. On one leg we have economic and social integration very fast. We've seen a lot more cross-border marriages. People are retiring in mainland China. Many mainland students come to university, but in our university. But on the other hand, some people still take it too much about our difference, like our cultural difference, value difference. I think we should recognize, tolerate, or even appreciate that there are differences.
Diversity.
And that's very important for us to move in the next 30 years of one country, two systems.
Speaking of the next 30 years, what's going to happen? Is it written anywhere that after the initial 50 years, this arrangement is set to continue?
Although the basic law, there's no exit clause, means whether the basic law will still affect after 50 years. I think given the facts that the first 20 years were successful, if the next 30 years is same successful, I don't think there's a reason the NPC should not let the basic law continue.
It was reported by Western media that a representative of the liaison office, Central Liaison Office here in Hong Kong, actually warned that if things doesn't go all right for the next 30 years, this one country, two systems, or the two systems part can be rescinded. What is the reaction? What are your reactions to that?
I think I haven't read about that particular media coverage, but I've heard other people, including local people, who said that. I think there's some, bottom lines that you can't cross. Okay, for example, if Hong Kong declare independence, I think that will be the end of definitely one country, two systems, because one country is the fundamental of the two systems. Otherwise, why are you talking about two systems if it's not one country? So there's certain things. I mean, national security is another thing. Article 23, we haven't had that, for 20 years. We are facing a very complicated international political arena right now. With China fast growing, but a lot of different forces. You look at Europe, look at the Muslim migration issue, look at the new leadership in US. So national security has now been held as a very, very high priority for China. Mm-hmm. So if that has been affected, I suspect that people will then think, okay, well, if one country, two systems is hurting the national security, then we may have an issue. I think if you don't cross those bottom lines, though, the rest, if it's just argument, if it's just, slow of, the Legislative Council getting things done, I don't think that would be a problem.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Ho?
Well, I think one country, two systems is the best arrangement for both Hong Kong and the mainland China. And looking forward, I think it's important that people in Hong Kong, young people in Hong Kong, and also maybe young people in the mainland China should really engage dialogue and see how we will move forward. I remember back 30 years ago, I think the difference between Hong Kong and mainland, or the gap, is much greater than now. But back then, people in Hong Kong and mainland China were able to draft basic law, which secures our system until now. So although we have lots of differences or arguments, I think the differences actually have narrowed much since in the past 30 years. So I really hope that we could have dialogue between people in Hong Kong and mainland China and have a more forward-looking attitude towards this one country, two systems.
Finally, it's very easily said, but much more difficult to be done. How can we have more effective communication and dialogue between the two sides, Professor Ho?
I think Hong Kong young people need to be more exposed to the mainland system, to the motherland's history, and they should be encouraged to have more exchange with the people on the mainland.
I've been involved in a lot of this youth exchange with China. I think our problem is we have been showing them only the good things. What we need to do in the future is to show them real things. So they're good things. We got satellites. We got a lot of big economic growth. We also have environmental problems. We also have this and that problems, and we have an aging population. There's this the new normal. We can't grow as fast as we were. Show them the problems and let them have ownership. And that's what I do. I tell the university students in Hong Kong, I say, yes, China has problems, but it's your motherland. So you, as a future leader, if you were put in the seats of the next premier, what would you do? Let them have that kind of ownership. They will feel more connected. Right now, we're saying, oh, we have all these great things. We've got rockets, we've got satellites, but we don't. Then they watch the TV and they saw something else. There's kind of a mistrust then. So what we need to do is build a trust. Build a trust by telling them the real things, and also try to touch them on their soul. Try to not just tell them you have big economic benefits, but tell them also, as we are part of the rejuvenization of the Chinese national, and how we will do that. And then I think that will actually bring together both sides, because a lot of the young people, they do want to have something to look up to.
Yeah.
They don't just want to be told. So we can do that.
We are as normal human beings just as they are.
Yes.
They were all real human beings with advantages and disadvantages. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We have to come to the end of this edition of a special roundtable on the point about the future of one country, two systems. Professor Richard Hu of the Department of Politics and Public Administration of University of Hong Kong, Dr. Whitman Hong, Principal Liaison Officer for Hong Kong Shenzhen Qianhai Authority and Chairman Emeritus of Y Elite Association, and Mr. Henry Ho, convener of One Country, Two Systems. And as usual, here is my last point. The reason why many young Hong Kongers are ignorant about the Chinese mainland is largely because their teachers have also very poor knowledge about what has happened in China over the past few decades. Now, their memory of China rests with the past, and not knowing China has made huge progress and is continuing to reform and opening up. Can ignorance plus an inward-looking mentality equip Hong Kong people with the necessary mentality needed to embrace the future? I doubt. The answer is yes. Now, the One Country, Two Systems principle has the potential to maintain Hong Kong's strengths in the future, and the key lies in the hand of everyone. Thank you very much for watching this special roundtable discussion at the point. I'll see you next time.